Of the economy, Wale Edo says the economic diplomacy carried out by President Bwala Tinubu is generating the desired result. Mr. Edo said the president had embarked on fruitful economic diplomacy with different governments, including Brazil, China, India, Germany, and France, as well as other governments. He says as a follow-up on economic diplomacy, he led a delegation to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to ensure the success of the developing relationship between him and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, in the face of rising cost of living and economic challenges, how will all these diplomatic partnerships benefit Nigerians? And how will President Tinubu's economic policies put food on the tables of Nigerians and pay their bills? To speak more on this tonight, I am being joined by the presidential spokesman and special advisor to the president on media and policy communication, Dr. Daniel Bwala. Good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us on Politics Tonight.
And also good to be here in your Lagos studio, this state of the art. This is my first time coming to this center.
Thank you very much for coming to the studio. You know, this is 2025 and Nigerians are wondering whether the renewed hope promised them by President Bwala Tinubu would come to fruition. You had said the president is the most people-centric president you've ever seen. And the president has also said, I'm here to serve, and I will solve the myriads of problems facing Nigeria. What are the prospects for the country in various sectors?
So, yeah, if you, when the president took the oath of office at that time, it's good to situate situation as the way they were and where we are today. When he took over government at the time, we had 26 states of the federation that were declared bankrupt. They couldn't pay salaries. That's when the insecurity situation in the country was so bad that I remember in the twilight of Buhari's administration in Abuja, terrorists were operating inside Abuja. At one time, they even threatened that they were going to come to Villa. That is the audacity of terrorism at the time. And then, of course, you know that there was disunity. The nation was just going in a very terrible direction. Then there was no money to add to injury to salt or to salt to injury. There was no money. So when he came, the only thing he could do realistic at the time was to initiate policy that would reshape Nigeria. It's like we were going to reconstruct the house and lay a foundation that would last, because it seemed like we were building on a faulty foundation. And at that time, it seems we began to see the cracking already. This policy, he knew right from the beginning that it was going to give a temporary pain to the Nigerian people it will hurt. And he didn't hide it from them. Right from his speech, he said, buckle up, I know that this is going to bring pain, but I want you to have faith in our administration, because we believe that this reform is going to ultimately lead us out of the predicament. Now, 18 months after, if you look at the numbers, statistically speaking, there is a consensus, unanimity of purpose among the economists that the economy of Nigeria now is a bit safe. That what we need now is to guide it through speed in the process. That's one. Number two, we are no longer complaining about governors not being able to pay salaries because of lost revenue. We are now asking them to deliver on the promise because we have enough resources for the state. Three, you are looking at the investment that we're making in various, for example, in education through the NEL fund. You will see people, data that can be ascertained, you can point at it, people who are benefiting from the NEL fund program. Look at our investment in agriculture. Hunger now has become a global pandemic, so to speak. In the last G20 summit, as well as the climate change summit, two things that were discussed at the time was dealing with hunger and then the climate change. Almost a year before this came as a concept in the by the global community, the president had already perceived that hunger is likely going to be a problem. And then we started the investment in the agriculture. You can see improved seedlings. We had a setback when we had, what do you call it, in Borno, Adama, and Yobe, when we had that flood and disaster with insecurity in the northwest. It affected food crops of the people. So it reflected in the numbers for food inflation at the time. And the naysayers went to town and said, we told you that this policy is not working. About 3 days ago, based on market survey, we got a quite number of items in the market that began to come down. Understandably, Nigeria is a nation of religious people. So you find that in 1 year, you are going to find more than 6 festive seasons. And the Nigerian people understood that. So with respect to agriculture, you find people buying, holding, and then hiking it. That is artificial inflation. Inflation that is not determined by data and statistics based on the fundamentals. But the government is taking effort to expose some of these activities.
All right.
So in a nutshell, I can say convincingly that our worst days are behind us.
You know, interestingly, Nigerians have not been so satisfied with the outcome of the president's policies. And also on the other side, you have the World Bank saying, stay the course. Meanwhile, the president is saying, please bear with me.
Right.
Everything will come to normal. Right. But Nigerians are asking for how long? Yeah. You have said 18 months down the line. Right. Nigerians are asking for how long? 4 years is almost here. Yeah,
so if you look at the dynamics of what we are confronted by, it is impossible to bring a revolutionary reform within a short time. And we are not here to promise the Nigerian people or to give them false hope and false promises. But what we're telling them is that in spite of the hope that we're saying we're renewing by virtue of the reform agenda, you can see the effect of the reform already. I talked about agriculture, we look at the education, and then the insecurity, we're dealing with that, and then looking at how to help our people to become entrepreneurs. Because when you, for example, employment that people talk about, no nation succeeds by getting all of the citizens to be employed by government. Employees don't build a nation. Yes, we understand the role of middle class, right? But when you build a society where people are able to do something tangible, God has blessed this country with youthful population of people who are enthusiastic, people that are ready, given the right tool and the training, and they will launch into it. So our message to the Nigerian people, when they say how long, however long it will take for us to correct the situation and make it work. But the president has intervention, which is what I told you. Even in the Brentwood principles or Brentwood rules that people take, sometimes the World Bank, I don't want to use the word hypocritical, but sometimes in order to save face, they make certain statements that can be seen to be outlandish. So for example, if you look at the World Bank rules governing economic reform, they have what they call strong country ownership. It's like an exception to the general rule. Even when you are applying the principles very strictly, that you are permitted sometimes to tinker with that until you are able to tell, because circumstances differ. The situation in Nigeria might be different from the situation in Burundi, different from the situation in Ghana. That's why you find that even though we remove subsidy, but there are times the president intervenes here and there. It means application of strong country ownership.
Do they really get to those who need them?
Yeah. So, for example,
what's the data? What data is the federal government using? Because I've spoken to, the Minister of Agriculture, for instance. He could not give me an accurate data to back up these interventions. And to date, I do not think there's still an accurate data to back up these interventions. For the agricultural sector, for instance, how is government ensuring that these interventions do not get to political farmers, if you know what I mean?
Yes, I get your point. Now, in fact, that's the reason why in the performance assessment, part of the requirement for the performance assessment is to ensure that your performance can be measured. It is not something you say in the air. And you measure performance when you have data that supports the progress that you are making. So I give you an example with respect to agriculture. The data, the much data that we have is that we can tell you at every given time the number of, say, trucks of rice, for example, that has been sent to all the states of the Federation. So to the extent of knowing the volume, we know it. But in terms of distribution, this is where we have a little problem with our democracy. The president cannot control the governors. When he makes certain intervention available to them, the baton is like in a race. You give the baton over to the governors. I think that the Nigerian people should escalate our conversation where we don't work with the mindset of military, unitary system of government. If mosquito bite me in my village, the president is responsible. But they don't know that there's government at the local level. We have implemented, we have succeeded in getting local government autonomy. Money now can go to the local government to deal with chieftaincy matter, local government administration, primary health care, primary education, secondary education. These are things that the money going to the local government will be used in taking care of it. Nobody bothers to ask the governors. So this is where sometimes
probably
money
because
goes,
they do not know the power they hold in holding these governors accountable.
I think that we practice democracy and federal system of government, but because we have been ruled by the military for many years, our mindset is that of unitary system of government. You think that everything that revolves around your life, the president is directly or indirectly responsible.
All right. The president was in Tanzania for Mission 300, where he reiterated Nigeria's commitment to achieving universal energy access by 2030. He emphasized the government's target of increasing renewable energy to constitute 50% of the national energy mix. And most importantly, he talked about robust international partnerships to finance and implement Nigeria's energy transition agenda. Have we done enough on our own part to attract these kinds of foreign investments?
Very important. In fact, this is closely related to climate change. It is because of the concept of climate change that people are looking for alternatives to energy, renewable energy and the rest. These industrialized nations, they have enough infrastructure to enable them achieve the climate goals and objectives because they've already, through their industrialization processes, burned the greenhouse gases. In this part of the world where we don't have infrastructure, a lot of things are yet, in fact, we are not considered as developed country, we have not industrialized. That means we have enormous responsibility or task in order to bring our nation to that point. They're asking us to give up the burning of greenhouse gases through the various projects. This is where the international partnership that the President is talking about, because in every climate forum, there is this promise for nations that are stable to give support to the nations that are upcoming so they can meet up with the climate objective. It is bold and ambitious. If I tell you, you won't believe. Number one strongest country in the world is the United States of America. All of the progress they have achieved through climate change, by the emergence of Donald Trump, they're all thrown to the dustbin. Climate change and renewable energy or alternatives to the burning of greenhouse gases is a global challenge. But the president on this side of heaven is committed to it. And that's why in that conference, he made those bold steps, deliverables as ascertainable goals that we hope to achieve.
So you answered my question. My question is, have we done enough on our own part to attract these kinds of foreign investments?
We just had the conference. It's like when you go to a conference and they say, when we go home, we should start playing football. And you just came back. How can you say you already have a stadium?
So the basis of that question was to ask you how far this administration has gone in removing bottlenecks, impeding business competitiveness in the country, just as the president promised last year.
Right. We are doing it through regulatory framework. For example, the tax law that we have succeeded to the 90%, we have just the 10% to bring it to bear. It's part of those regulations that will make ease of doing business because people will know there will be return on investment. It will also help our people to rise and not to be burdened by tax that are avoidable because of their circumstances. That regulation is part of the effort of the federal government to meet up with that. But apart from regulation in the area of taxation, for example, there are incentives that the federal government is giving to investors. You know, all these places he goes around the world, he promised to give them incentive if you bring investment, but it is not an incentive that is abstract. We need to know how much you're bringing as investment into the country, and then we can sit on the table and agree on how much incentive we can give to you. But the president is open to it. Right,
so still talking about cleaner energy and whether or not we've done our own part. The CNG buses, any update on that?
Yes, so the challenge we're having at the moment, you see all over the country, people are in their troops rushing to take advantage of those services. But because we have a large population and the limited capacity and infrastructure, we are not able to meet with the pace and the speed. But we're making effort to open up the window so that a lot of investors can come into it. And so our target is that before the first term of the president, we should be able to say with all conviction and confidence that we have attained a level that can be considered to be like 30%.
Second term? Before the first term of the president?
Before the end of the first term, yes.
Right. We are just about... Do you think Nigerians believe in that intervention, the CNG buses?
If they don't...
they've keyed into that intervention?
It was not ghosts that were running all over the places taking advantage. It's Nigerians. Right. They believe in it. Look at it. If you are, like for example, during the festive season when CNG transportation was used as a system to convey people to their respective, look at how cheap it is. It's almost half the value of the normal transportation system. And if you talk to somebody, for example, who is either a small-scale businessman or a middle-class Nigerian, and you tell him that this opportunity avails you to be able to have your expenses, you can have your expenses because in urban towns, 60% of the expenditure goes around transportation. So Nigerians are excited and they are in all over the places.
All right. So, I mean, the president also talked about increasing access to credit for individuals and critical sectors of the economy to boost national economic output. It says to achieve this, the federal government will establish a national credit guarantee company to expand risk sharing instruments for financial institutions and enterprises. I'm wondering, what makes this different from Credit Corps?
The other one is like the one he's established like a credit guarantee. So meaning that maybe before now, access to credit is difficult because there's no guarantee. You don't have the infrastructure, facility, or security that can stand as guarantee for you to access the credit. When you have a credit institution of the federal government, that means you already have a guarantor. So and probably the government will be able to come out with modalities. If you meet this requirement and you become eligible to access the credit, the government will stand in for you pending on when you are able to pay back based on the agreement you would have had. In other words, just like in those days where if you are trying to access loan, they will ask you to bring certain security as guarantee. The federal government is saying, because we want to encourage investment, we are going to create an agency to speak, or an organization that is going to stand as a credit guarantee.
Talking about Credit Corps, has that kicked off?
No, it has not yet.
When should Nigerians expect that?
So when you conceive an idea, at the conception level, you are creating a skeleton. Then you develop that. And after developing
it's been like a year or 6 months now.
Yes, because it requires infrastructure. It is not like let there be light and there was light. It is something that will involve people, it will involve infrastructure, it will involve places, it will involve regulation and backup. So what we are guaranteeing the Nigerian people is that each and every one of these policies that we're unfolding, they have timelines. And so, for example, if this has to do with the ministry of a particular minister in government, I'm sure that those who are looking for opportunity in that field, when their engagement with the minister, they will be able to have indefinite times, the timelines for either the establishment, the access, or the implementation of that policy.
All right, Dr. Bwala, let's take a break, and when we return, we'll continue this conversation. Please stay with us, everyone. Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Tonight, we're discussing President Tinubu's economic policy and diplomacy, and I've been speaking with Dr. Daniel Bwala, presidential spokesman and special advisor to President on Media and Policy Communication. Dr. Bwala, thank you for staying with us on the program. Let's talk about the budget, because economists have raised concerns about the effect of the increased spending on the inflation targets of the federal government, which was 15%. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Now, you would need to react to some of those questions. Why would government raise the budget when its deficit is running to almost 16 trillion naira? Economists are saying the deficit is hitting up the economy, and with all of these borrowings here and there, government should have simply reduced the deficits.
So I am not very, very deep in economics, but the fair knowledge of economics that we all need to know how a country will succeed with the people, especially with budget, is that given what we have on ground and given the limited resources, which is the very essence of economy, right? The limited resources. Usually, it's either you have a revenue, you increase tax, or you will have to borrow. The little regulation we brought with this taxation, you can see the effort of the government by saying, if your threshold is below a certain level, you don't have to pay tax for people who are using public transportation or people who are earning a certain amount. So in the same way that you're giving this kind of incentive to individuals, it means you are reducing the extent of the revenue that you can get arising from taxation. You will have to cover for that. And I think which explains the idea.
Instead of generating more revenue or borrowing more.
No, we are generating revenue. So we have been, if you see lately, we have been working tremendously in the non-oil sector. The non-oil sector, we look at agriculture. Agriculture, in fact, in all of these non-oil sector of the economy has taken, in my view, I may not be accurate, has taken probably 50 to 60% of the commitment and investment of government. Because if you deal with hunger, for example, it will take care of a lot of things. We talked about technology, and there are programs of the government that will give opportunity for the youth to access credit for the purpose of improving in technology. I used to say that long before now, before we had techs like Flutterwave and Paystack, nobody would have believed that Nigerians can come up with concept and idea that will attract global attention. The federal government is looking at that area because our dependence and over-reliance on oil cannot take us out of this predicament. We have to be able to look at the non-oil sector and ensure that we leverage on that.
But really, do you think some of the requests made by these ministries and agencies are genuine enough, especially at the time the president has been asked to, or the president is determined to cut the cost of governance? And Nigerians are asking him to check the lifestyle of these ministers and CEOs, or rather MDs of these agencies.
I don't know the request you're talking about.
Increased funding. I mean, some of the agencies, some of the ministries were asking for increased funding.
So the funding is for investment in their ministries. So for example, if you see, if that's the very idea of even borrowing. As long as what the revenue or the borrowing you are making is to invest in critical areas that will also revamp the economy, like infrastructure, for example, education, human capital development. These are places that are fertile for those investments. So if ministry, for example, of government has a program that deals with this thing, no matter how much they make demand from the government, it's what the government will be glad to do that. It is only when you borrow to pay salaries or you borrow to feed, that means you're borrowing and investing in the areas that are more or less like waste, because you're not giving it the opportunity to recreate itself. That is when you will say, okay, we're questioning that kind of spending. So if, for example, you want to tell, maybe you have in your mind a particular ministry that has made a demand and then intends to invest whatever it will get from the federal government in areas that you think are not connected with the objective, then I'll be happy to
I wish we had enough
that.
time for this conversation, because Nigerians are saying only performance should be used to justify demands for more funds by the MDAs. This is 2025.
Even the president, if you permit me, even that's the very idea of that performance assessment when they had the retreat. Performance is the key indicator is your performance. And like I said when we started talking earlier, you don't say it. So for example, they are measurable. I have not seen a particular ministry and the indicators set for him, performance standards. But definitely at every given time, there must be a time where you're going to be assessed and see. And then if you perform, then you will be eligible for whatever you're asking. If you don't perform, not just that you may not have investment or the attention of the federal government, you may even lose your job.
All right, two more questions before I let you go. The ICT sector, I know at the time the government or the federal government says it has secured $620 million under the Digital and Creative Enterprises Program, aimed at creating millions of IT and technical jobs for the youths. Any updates on that?
I don't have an update because, but I know that the Minister of Communication has taken extensive time over the last 1.5 years or so in various fora, even organizing programs where he talks about the revolution we're seeking to have in the digital sector. So I don't have all of those details.
All right. So finally, before I let you go, let's talk politics, because Bwala has called on President Bwala Tinubu to practice what it advocates by adopting the Nigeria First ideals rather than focusing on self-interest and other divisive sentiments, and has also accused this administration of paying opposition leaders 50 million naira to undermine Nigeria's democratic process. Is this to indicate that it may be saying the truth? Because at the time, you had vouched for the personality of
in the election,
across ethno-religious barriers. In 1 minute.
So, you know, when you make allegations, you have to substantiate. I remember after that report about his claim, there is this president of the Association of Political Parties who went on air and said they were not aware of that. Sometimes claims can be made in order to put people in check, so that if they are intending to collect money, why will the president give money to any political party?
Dr. Bwala, we're out of time, but I hope we'll have this conversation some other time. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Daniel Bwala, Presidential Spokesman, Special Advisor to President of Media and Policy Communication. Thank you so much for your time and politics tonight. And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That's a package tonight. Please join us again tomorrow. Good night.